Hello, and welcome to another episode from Season 6 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a passion for scary movies. Each week we pick a different horror movie and dissect it to figure out what it was trying to accomplish, how well it did, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season we're changing things up. We're devoting a whole season to reviewing Esquire's list of the 50 scariest movies of all time. In each episode, we'll break down a different movie, talk about how scary it really was, and then update our rankings to prove how much smarter we are than the other people on the internet. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. So, this movie was based on a Roald Dahl novel, and he also wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I find it that very interesting because I think the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory with Gene Wilder is a significantly better horror movie than this movie.
I know, man.
But if you think back on that movie though, like there was the scene where they're like on the boat, which I mean everybody would say like that's like a scary scene. It's very intense and it's pulled off very well from a like pin you in your seat, get you nervous type scene, which is what horror movies try to do. And the psychological aspect of using the children's vices against them, or like symbolically that being their downfall, is a very like Seven style kind of psychological horror thing. And I mean, it was pulled off in a more like kiddie friendly way. But I would argue that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory had more horror elements, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the movie, had more horror elements than this movie did.
No, I agree 100% on that. I noticed that when I was doing some reading, I saw that and I was like, oh, yeah, the boat scene. Yeah. But then it got me thinking, like the first time I watched Willy Wonka was when I was young, I mean, even now it's pretty trippy at that scene, makes you uncomfortable, but it's obviously not too scary. So maybe that's what the person who did this list was going through when they watched The Witches when they were.
Yeah, and he did mention in the description, and I guess for anybody listening for the first time, this season we're going through Esquire's list of the 50 scariest movies of all time. This week we watched the movie The Witches, and in the description of the article, like the list, it said that this was one that he watched as a kid and was scared by.
Right. And also, we'd like to put this out there that we're not sponsored by Esquire, so we can talk shit about the list if we want to.
No, this list is inexcusable. There are no excuses. This dude does not actually like horror, is what I'm taking away from it. Most of the movies aren't scary, and I declare here and now that when we are done with this season, we will publish our own vastly superior list, and then anybody who wants to come at us about it can. But I can tell you that good luck if you decide to, because if this is what people think horror is, our list is going to blow minds.
I know. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, okay, well, here's the thing. We picked this list, and that's what we knew. The possibility of what could happen, and we're only halfway through, and it's kind of happening. Of like, okay, well, these aren't the greatest, but looking up lists, not too many people want to put it out there. The scary, what they think the scariest movies are, as far as like horror sites. They want to put like what they think is one of the best, but not, the list. But we're going to put it out there. Yes. We're going to put the list out there of like, this is what we think, this is our list. We'll combine our powers for this list. And, if anyone wants to get at us, get at us.
I think this guy had 20 scary movies, and then he was like, oh, crap, I'm supposed to get 50. I have to start Googling. And he's like, what was that movie that I was kind of scared, that gave me a nightmare one time when I was a kid? Yeah, that'll go on there. I don't know if there have been any horror movies at film festivals lately. Yeah, let's throw that in there too. It's. I don't feel like the list was written by a fan, and it frustrates me.
I think so going through the list, I think they were trying, like, so this is the way I took it. I actually didn't notice that. I didn't read about what The Witches was about as far as his list goes, and Katie did, because she likes to read. She's also a nerd, and so I was like, what the hell are we, what is, like, I kind of knew from a text that you sent, but I was like, what the hell? And she's like, well, the list says it's for, it's kids movie. I was like, oh, okay. So then you start watching, and then you realize that, okay, well, there's no reason why this should be on the list, because it's not one of the scariest movies of all times.
Yes.
He's saying this is the best horror movies of all time. That's what the URL says, that the actual line is 50 scariest movies of all time.
Yes.
It should say 50 scariest movies of all time to me, like to the writer.
Yeah.
And because like we both love Ernest Scared Stupid.
Yes.
I love it. And that was a movie that my brother and I watched when we were kids, Halloween time. I mean, we love it, but it's not the scariest movie of all time.
Yeah.
And even if something was scary back then doesn't mean the scariest now. So It's almost like someone who's maybe not a fan of horror movies, just throwing out movies out there just because, like we watch horror movies at least every week once at least. And, it's something that we kind of do. So it's like, I think the name of the list should just be a little bit different. Yeah. As in, I think these are the 50 scary movies, and you could only relate if you were me.
A person names 50 horror-ish movies at random.
Yeah.
But we are sticking to our word. We are working our way through the list, and I'm going to introduce this one so we can get on with it.
Sound good.
And maybe we'll even find some ways to have a little fun along the way.
Okay.
All right. In 1990, director Nicholas Roeg released the dark fantasy film The Witches, which was based on a Roald Dahl novel of the same name. Produced by Jim Henson Productions, this kids' movie stars Angelica Houston as the head witch at a convention of witches who are planning to take over all the candy shops in England and turn all children into mice. An orphan boy, his pet mice, and his grandma are the only ones who take on the challenge to stop them. Though the film was not considered to be a box office success, critics enjoyed it, and it is currently being remade into a new movie of the same name that will be released in 2020. This movie can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
So, that's great. However, I want to put this out there, that you've kind of said my facts for this week, as far as the writer writing Willy Wonka and this, that they're remaking it, and but I do have, I'll say two. Oh, did you know Angelica Houston was dating Jack Nicholson during this time?
No.
When they were filming it?
Huh.
Yeah. Supposedly, he constantly had roses delivered to her.
Wow.
He's such a romantic.
Yeah.
That was probably right before he started dating 18-year-olds. Anyway, also, the greatest difference between the movie and the book is the ending. Yeah. So, the book's told first-person narrator who doesn't have a name, and neither does the grandma. In the movie, the boy's name Luke, and the grandma's name is Helga. The book ends with the boy living as a mouse. I'll be a very old mouse, and you'll be, quote, I'll be a very old mouse, and you'll be very old grandmother, and soon after that we will both die together. The narrator says in the book. In the movie version, obviously we know what happens if you watch this, but he gets turned back to a little boy.
Randomly. Yeah.
By a good witch.
Who just shows up for some reason, even though she has no vested interest in his storyline.
So another thing I was reading was, this is just another thing I read was that the screening, originally, they thought the movie was too scary for kids. It's true.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, but which I find pretty funny. But that being said, they kind of fixed it up a little bit and edited. But I will say this: I wish I could go back to being a kid to watch this to see what if I would legit think it's a scary movie or not. I would think that this could be a movie that you could watch with your kids.
Oh yeah,
and they would be totally freaked out. I think our beef with the list is just don't say it's the 50 scariest movies of all time.
Yeah.
As a general idea.
So for me, I would put this one with like Gremlins. In that it has a lot of horror elements, but it also has some comedy. Like it's one that you could take younger kids to, and it wouldn't, scar them for life or anything. No one would call you a bad parent for taking your child to this movie.
Right. And I also want to put this out there. We've watched some bad movies that are just hard to watch because they're so long and all that. Mm-hmm. Once I got into the rhythm of like, oh, okay, this is just a kid's movie. Like I could get through it easier. Because it's like, okay, well, yeah, obviously the goofy music's gonna play. Yeah. It's 90s movie, so that's right up our alley.
Yeah.
But also when I like turned to Katie and I was like, okay, like this is insane. Like she was in love with it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because as a kid, I mean, it's not like one of our movies where she has to like cover her eyes and ears so she doesn't get scared from a jump scene or something. So. It is what it is.
Yeah, but I mean, so I went into it with that expectation, like based on the description that I read, and I think that it did a good way or a good job of setting itself up as what it was going to be in the beginning. Like it had that Home Alone music at the beginning, almost kind of Christmassy sounding, like is at the beginning of basically every 90s like kids movie, and so you knew it wasn't going to be horror. And it was also rated PG, so you knew it wasn't going to be like super violent or gory or anything. So I think going into this movie, as you said, it's very important to think of it as sort of a safe horror movie for kids. It's like age-appropriate horror.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely age-appropriate for kids, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I decided I didn't want to be completely negative this week, which was a little hard. Because there were a lot of things about the movie I didn't like. Okay. But something I did like a lot was the set. I really liked that old hotel where it was filmed, and I feel like that was absolutely perfect for the story to take place in. And just like the visuals of it were extra effective for the environment that they were trying to create.
Yeah. Yeah, this movie definitely has like, I mean, it's definitely a children's movie from our childhood. Mm-hmm. Like the same, like, it kind of feels like fall. It has that music playing that plays in, like you said, with Home Alone or, like Three Ninjas, Kickback. Yeah. Like just those, that style. So it is nostalgic in that, So the beef is not necessarily with the movie itself. It's just a list for me. Yeah. But at the same time, I think if I had to pick something positive, I thought, like, once I saw Jim Henson's, like produces it, I was like, oh, okay, I'm sure there's going to be some, like, puppet tribute, whatever that is. And, like, I liked the way that the mice looked, like, especially the witch mouse at the end. That was kind of funny. I was like when she was turning into it, it was like, oh, that's the Jim Henson thing right there for sure. So
and I thought the mice were actually pulled off better than some of the other effects. Like Angelica Houston as the witch looked pretty convincing. Like that was a really elaborate makeup setup, but it was like well done. It was quality work. But all of the other witches in that room, like a lot of them, you could see the seam on the bald cap, like really.
Yeah, or the 5 o'clock shadow.
Yeah, exactly.
I loved it.
Yeah,
I thought it was so great.
Yeah, I mean, like, but it just seemed like such a rushed job. Like, I don't know. It seemed very distracting for a movie that had such good special effects in other places. Yeah. But. Anyway, my biggest beef with this movie was the adaptation, I guess. Like, in a book, you have a lot of time with the characters, and you spend time with them to, like, learn about them, to make you invested in them, so that over time, like, they can tell a more convincing story because of that connection. In this movie, though, I feel like there was a ton of the book that got rushed in the beginning, and I haven't read the book, but this is what I'm guessing, because the whole first part of this movie, like up until where they go to the hotel, had no connection back to anything else. Like the kid's parents dying and the grandma being diagnosed with diabetes. What does that have to do with any of the rest of the movie?
Right.
And like there was that witch who came after Luke in his treehouse. And then that didn't lead to anything. I kept expecting to find out that like the grandma used to be a witch and had renounced it, so like they had killed the parents and wanted to take Luke as revenge or something. But no, I mean none of it ever came back. It never tied off. There was just no point to any of like the first 20 or 30 minutes of the movie.
Yeah. Well, and then the doctor was the one who told him that she should go to the hotel close to the beach for her health or something, right? Isn't that what it was?
Yeah, but
I thought
they could have gone there for literally any other reason. Like that didn't.
Yeah.
Her health didn't play into any of the rest of the events in the story.
Yeah.
So
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah, it was definitely. I mean, you could definitely pick this movie. My thing was like, why did they have to use a potion to get the kids turned into mice if they can just
when they
turn
have
them
powers
from mouse to
exactly.
without it?
Yeah,
and it's like, oh,
yeah,
that's okay, but it makes the story of what they needed to do, and maybe this is just not a great film adaptation of it.
Yeah, and I mean it's fine for a kids movie. Like it doesn't need to have a deep story to be effective for kids, but it also didn't mentally engage me at the level that I like from a movie. So I had time to do some thinking about some other things while I was watching this movie, and one of them was things that would have been better titles.
Oh,
you ready for this?
Yeah, I like this.
Number 1, Bad Grandma. So kind of like Bad Grandpa, but because she smoked cigars and was a badass. Number 2, The Softcore Shining.
Oh,
because the hotel looked kind of like the one from The
did.
Shining, but it was a very softcore version of horror. All right, if they ever did a like a ice skating show version of this, like they do for Marvel and Disney princesses and stuff, it could be called Micecapades.
Ooh.
My personal favorite, Stuart Little Scared Stupid.
Oh, yes.
Then one that's probably funnier to me than anyone else, The Rescuers 3, Diabetes by the Sea.
Oh.
And then,
I was wondering if that was going to come into play, yeah.
And then my final one was, I think the most appropriate title for the movie would have been 80 Minutes Wasted, but that's, again, me not liking it.
I don't know. I like Stuart Little Scared Stupid. I think that's my favorite out of all of them. That's great.
But yeah, there were a few things in this one, though, where I was just like, I don't understand why they're spending so much time on this, and I kept waiting for it to, like, come back. But, like, the magic painting where the girl moves around when no one's looking and then grows old and ages over, like, what? That was super interesting. That was great setup. But what was it for?
I thought that was going to be Helga.
Yeah.
And she was going to, like, do the witch thing. I was thinking it was down that
yeah, I kept waiting for some kind of connection with that. But
yeah.
Yeah, and then in the beginning where the grandma is spending a bunch of time telling Luke about witches, it was funny to me because most of the stuff, like, it sounded somewhat reasonable, but there would be no way to prove it. So she'd be like, oh yeah, witches have crazy stubs where their toes would be, so if you see a woman wearing reasonable shoes, she might be a witch. And I think she basically just goes on to, like, say every piece of advice she gives for identifying a witch is like, is that woman over the age of 65 and in 1990? Probably a witch. So yeah, anyway, again, that didn't really play anything into the rest of the movie, like as far as like him needing to identify them. But I guess it was just kind of like creating that mythology for kids, because they see the movie and then they go out and then they see a bunch of, elderly, reasonably dressed women and they're just like, that could be a witch or something. Mm-hmm. But anyway, in an ongoing effort to make our listeners more prepared to deal with the real world, in getting ready for this podcast, I did some reading, and so I have some witch facts to spice things up as we go along. So I'll just work them in. But to start off with, witch fact. Witch facts. If you ever see an elderly woman with a cat, she's definitely a witch.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, just
That's
real short,
my sister one day.
Practical advice.
My sister has 3 black cats. She's probably a witch.
She's a triple witch.
Huh.
Yeah. So steer clear. But yeah, as far as how the movie was made, it really reminded me of like a 90s Stephen King movie.
Yeah.
Like kind of the specific camera and lighting style. It had that same feel, like almost like a made-for-TV type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it also seemed like a lot of the audio was added later. Like maybe they didn't pick it up well when they were recording the scene, so they had people do the lines and then like superimpose them. Like it felt like a lot of the speaking wasn't recorded at the same time the scene was being filmed.
Mm-hmm.
And so things were a little bit off a few times, and that was kind of distracting, and I was a little surprised by it.
Yeah, and you can kind of tell when that happens because it goes from like the audio being like normal, and then all of a sudden you get like real clean, crisp sound.
Yes.
Like going to the kid talking as a mouse is just like super. Which I mean, obviously that can't be done while the movie's being filmed, but it wasn't mixed. I didn't think it was mixed too well.
Yeah, it was very obvious when it was happening for sure. So yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but the best thing about this whole movie that we haven't even touched base on was the fact that we had Mr. Bean in it.
Yes, it was really weird seeing Mr. Bean as not Mr. Bean.
Yeah, and talking.
Oh,
Mr. Bean's one of those shows where like I watch when I'm sick. Like I had the stomach flu in March, and like I watched him not like every episode multiple times.
Yeah.
And so, like, you see him, and it's just like, oh, okay, like, hell yeah, I'm down for this. Like,
yeah,
you get Mr. Bean in there, and you get him talking.
Yeah.
You know, hell yeah.
So I had 2 more alternate movie titles that I forgot I put on my phone because I thought of them later. One was Mr. Bean the Convention, because his are always like Mr. Bean the Funeral or whatever. Yeah. And then the other was Powers for Algernon, which was a little bit of a stretch, but it made me smile. Yeah,
I think, Mr. Bean goes to the witch convention or something.
Yeah. He was one of the, and I thought I liked his character. There was definitely some more adult stuff going on with that character, which was kind of funny to see him in that role of all people.
Oh yeah, dude. I thought that's what I thought was kind of crazy about this movie was, like, you have things that came up in a children's movie, which parents have died in them. That's not uncommon, but it was just kind of weird how this one happened, like died in a car crash, and then like the kid was totally fine, but then like Mr. Bean like obviously like slaying one of his helpers in a room, and it's like if a kid's watching that, I'm sure they have no idea what's going on. It's like, oh, that's actually hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, there were some funny parts in the movie, for sure. But yeah.
Well, it was like the things that I think weren't meant to be funny, I found, that's what we find funny. But
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I mean, there's also, like, you can definitely see how this was, like, a kid's movie, like the chase scene. Oh, like, for some reason, the witches didn't smell the kid the whole time.
Yeah, until the end.
Yeah, until, like, right at the end of their meeting. But, the chase scene, he ends up chasing a stroller down and saves it right before the edge, but then like the witches are there and like goes. You can definitely see how this is a kid's movie. I will say this though: give me any Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, and it should be could beat this out on this list.
Yeah, for sure. Witch fact. Witch facts. If you ever see an old woman writing a check, she could be a witch.
Yeah, I thought that when I can't say that. I think that every time Katie writes our check for the water.
She's a witch too.
She's
Damn it.
A witch, dude. I'm freaking
You're
out,
surrounded.
man.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded.
But yeah, back to, you were talking about the scene at the convention where he was like behind the partition watching the whole time as the witches were talking and then turning his friend into a mouse.
Yeah.
I felt like that scene went on for hours. And I realized they probably only wanted to do that makeup setup for Angelica Houston once because it would take a lot of time and effort. So they really wanted to get their money's worth out of it. But it just, it was grating on me by the end, like the way that she was talking. And I felt like they just kept saying the same things over and over. And it just went on and on. And it kept flashing back to that exact same scene of him like behind the partition, like leaning forward so that the edge of his glasses touched the edge of the partition over and over. And it's like, dude, they only had to film that once. And they just copied and pasted that back in there.
Yeah.
I don't know. It to me, it lost a lot of momentum at that point. And then coming out of that, when they had turned both boys into mice, that's when I was just like, this thing jumped the shark. Yeah.
Here's an actual fact about witches.
Witch facts.
Which I find funny is technically in England, which this movie was based in, witchcraft. There was a Witchcraft Act of 1735 that was still official and on the books until 1951.
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
So maybe it was more relevant over there.
Well, it got deregulated, so now they can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
Witch fact.
Witch facts.
A witch might offer you sugar-free hard candy at any time.
That's my grandma, man.
Your grandma's a witch too?
Oh my god, well she was. R.I.P. Mamo. Miss you. I'm telling you, man, this movie, it's opening up so many eyes. I'm gonna be so skeptical of my whole family.
Yeah. And anytime you go to a grocery store or the bank.
Yeah. Or credit union.
Yeah. So
better way to bank.
That's true. But like in most kids' stories, I felt like the characters were all caricatures. They were just sort of exaggerated versions of themselves, and there wasn't really a lot of character development. It was just kind of like, well, the witch is bad, and the kid is good, and the other kid likes to eat, and the good guys are trying to stop the bad guys, and then they did. The end. Which, I mean, like, understandable, it's a kid's movie. But I did think it was funny that the big plot was for the witches to buy up all the candy stores.
Yeah.
That's the most like 5-year-old wrote this script thing ever. It's just like, what would be the worst thing you could imagine? Dangerous candy.
All the candy gone.
Yeah. They
give out sugar-free candy.
Witch fact.
Witch facts.
If you ever see an elderly woman driving under the speed limit in the middle of the afternoon, she is most definitely a witch.
Oh, dude, I got another word for those people. You're on the motorcycle and you get stuck behind them, and it's like lunchtime. Good God.
Yeah.
Bunch of witches.
So, another thing that I thought about during this movie, because I had lots of time to think, we should start a new concept called Deadly Drinking Games. And for this movie, it would be every time Mouse Luke says, "Grandma," in the most annoying way possible, take a shot.
Okay.
But I decided we need to roll that back, because that actually would be deadly. So you would need to just instead sip a beer or something.
No, I'm down to go for it, man. Let's just do it.
What do you think was the best scene in this movie?
I would say probably the ending. Like, not being funny as
when she turned him back into.
Yeah. But no. Sorry, the when they're at the hotel and Luke ends up putting the potion in the soup and it gets all the witches.
Yeah.
Just that whole like montage of like, that was the other thing I was talking about, like with it being not childish, was like having a hatchet with blood on it, like obviously killing mice, which wouldn't be human, which I thought was great. But I think that would probably be be it once they were kind of like turning into mice and like everyone was taking care of them, stomping them and stuff. Just them turning into mice and spewing green and stuff like that. Like that was, but also I think it was just like me being in a good mood because it was almost over with.
Yeah. Well, I thought the visual effects of that were really good, and I think my favorite scene was when the witch who had for some reason infiltrated the kitchen to cook turned into a mouse and then ran back out, and then Angelica Houston just stomped on her and she exploded into that puff of green smoke. That really caught me off guard because that was like there hadn't been any real violence in the movie so far, and just the fact that you knew that mouse had been the person, and then the fact that it was a puff of green smoke that happened, that just I thought was pulled off well visually, and also just as kind of a grab your attention type thing.
Yeah, I thought the fact that they didn't have Angelica Houston like continue on, like I just knew that she was going to survive, and which I thought I liked that fact, but
yeah,
I mean,
which fact?
Which facts?
A witch can often be seen sitting in the waiting room at a podiatrist's office, browsing an out-of-date newspaper.
You're gonna have to publish these, man.
It's for public safety.
Yeah. There's probably that one listener that's like writing these down.
Oh yeah.
He's like, oh my god, this is all true.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying you can never be too careful. So you're welcome, listener.
Like, initially the idea of the podcast was we wanted the podcast to get so big where we could just like rent out a movie theater for free and watch like classic movies.
Yes.
That's like our ultimate goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like now it should be that still, because we might not ever reach that goal. However, it should also be that we get a witch on the podcast and we can talk to him. I want to interview a witch.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep an eye out.
If I see, I'm basing it off these facts, though.
Yeah. We should just go to a nursing home.
Just wrote one check.
I was just driving to my doctor's appointment. Yeah. Anyway, what did you think of the ending of this movie?
Getting turned back to a mouse or to a human.
Yeah.
Seemed like he had it pretty good before he was a human.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a cool, like, he was on that cool car thing and they got a whole bunch of money.
It reminded me of the backyard in Blank Check.
Oh, yeah. That's a good call.
But mouse size.
Yeah. But then, like, once they got all that money, I was like, and then he turned into a human. I was like, cool. He's a human now, so he can spend all that cash.
Yeah. Yeah, I did not care for the ending because it was like, and then all the bad things suddenly weren't bad anymore, and they all lived happily ever after. Like, there was no real, and it felt kind of rushed on that. It was just like, oh, we got to hurry up and fix this so that kids believe in happy endings, which they shouldn't, because they don't happen that way. Welcome to real life. But I was encouraged because Roald Dahl apparently also really disliked the ending, specifically because of how they changed it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I heard on a couple. I heard there was multiple endings.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there was multiple endings. One was not. I think one was more towards the book, and the other one was the remake of it.
But overall, I think my final thought is that I wish I'd just watched Willy Wonka again. I'm not particularly interested in the remake of this that's coming out.
No, I don't think we'll watch it. Like, even the thing is like, I'll probably, if we have kids one day, you and I,
yes,
I'll show it to our kids. But this one, but not the remake.
Yeah,
it's like, come on, you can only do so much.
Yep. Yeah, I'm curious how that will do, because the original of this it wasn't like huge, Like, I know probably kids saw it on cable or something when they were younger, but it's not like it made a bunch of money at the box office or anything, so I don't know that their nostalgia grab will be that effective.
Yeah.
But I am excited for It Part 2, which is coming out soon. It's not on this
September
list.
September 5th.
But,
right?
Yeah. We got to do an episode on that.
Yeah, Katie and I are going next weekend.
Sweet.
We're gonna go to a nice theater. Yeah, that's gonna be exciting as hell, and I think we'll probably put out an episode soon after because we're just excited to watch it.
Oh, yeah.
Every time I see the preview, or it comes up on a commercial or something like that, Katie's like, "Oh my god, that's gonna be so good."
Yeah. Well, and previously I was very nervous about it because I really, really liked the first one. I went into it with kind of low expectations because of the TV version of it, but I thought they absolutely killed it, and I was like, why would you try again? You got it right, just leave it alone. You don't have to keep going, because the second part of the original It Made for TV movie was just where it, for me, kind of really went off the rails and was not very good. And so it's like, why are you tackling that and trying to remake it? Just let the thing stand alone. But now I'm getting excited.
Yeah.
I've seen previews. I got the hype. I'm excited.
Yeah, I think it's... Yeah, I'm interested to see how it comes out.
Yeah.
I have high hopes for it, but we'll see.
And just, if it's disappointing, we know life doesn't have happy endings, so...
It's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah. And then I'll just start calling everyone in the theater a witch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you ever see someone watching Days of Our Lives in a waiting room, pretty good chance that's a witch.
Witch facts.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Witch facts.